Anti-ICE protests are growing more violent in Minneapolis. Demonstrators repeatedly clashing with federal officers over enforcing the nation's immigration laws. Large crowds confronting ICE agents interfering with lawful operations there, and dozens arrested. The city's mayor insisting this current immigration operation is not actually about cracking down on crime. Here he was earlier.
Are willing to work with people when it's about murder and when it's about crime. But the truth is that this ain't about that. Why is the largest scale immigration enforcement action taking place where we don't even have that many undocumented immigrants? We do work with the federal government. In fact, we're presently doing that. We're presently doing this.
Texas,
so the truth is it's not about murder or crime. It's not.
Homeland Security Assistant Secretary Tricia McLaughlin, lots to unpack there. Is Minneapolis cooperating with ICE?
No, unfortunately not at all, Dana. We've arrested 25 criminal illegal aliens off of the streets of Minneapolis, and we have seen no help from state or local government in Minneapolis. But I think the American people should know, when we talk about our sanctuary city, what are we talking about? First and foremost, their state and local law enforcement are not allowed to engage with our law enforcement when our law enforcement is being assaulted, impeded, or obstructed. They're not allowed to answer calls for backup. That's why we see those growing violent crowds around our law enforcement as they try to enforce operations on the ground. But it also means, and this is so important, that our law enforcement officers are not allowed into the jails in Minneapolis. So we have murderers, we have rapists, we have child pedophiles. I mean, Dana, just look at this. An individual who was charged and convicted for murder of his 3-month-old son from Guatemala. That's one of the guys we've picked up. Known and suspected terrorists. An individual who was convicted of perpetuating human slavery. Those are the individuals who have been in these jails in Minneapolis. 470 of them. And yet Tim Walz has released them back onto the streets of Minneapolis to re-perpetuate the crimes. That's why we have to be out there in full force to make sure we're finding these individuals and we are apprehending them so they don't terrorize more Americans and make for more victims.
All right, so here is another question from Griff's interview. These are some of the individuals you were referring to there, Tricia, in your answer. Here is Mayor Fry when asked about passing judgment too soon. Griff's got the question on that. Let's listen.
Would you agree that no one should be jumping at conclusions until we have that investigation, and then we'll find out what facts can come to light?
When you have the secretary working at the federal government saying immediately that this was an action of self-defense, when you have the federal government booting the state government from the process entirely, yeah, there's concerns associated with that. I mean, look, we've all seen the video. I don't need to pass judgments here.
So based on that reaction, and when you cross-reference with the initial reaction, is he backing away in terms of his language?
It sure seems like he's creating some daylight between his language. I mean, the first thing he said after this incident was telling ICE to get the F out of Minneapolis. When I just listed some of the individuals that Minneapolis, their politicians and sanctuary policies are harboring. So I certainly think that he's backing away from that a little bit. But as far as our response from the federal government, Secretary Noem and President Trump were very measured. This is a serious moment, and we wanted to make sure we gave the American people the accurate facts quickly in a timely manner with ultimate transparency. I know the DOJ is conducting that investigation. We've put out quite a bit of footage of what happened with that incident from multiple different angles so the American people can see for themselves. And I do believe the American people are largely concluding that the individual in question, she weaponized her vehicle. She would not comply with law enforcement operations. She had been stalking them all day long. And unfortunately, this was an act of self-defense. And if you don't comply with law enforcement officers, if you use a deadly weapon against them, there are dangerous, and in this case, deadly consequences.
Yeah, and there's litigation that has gone through the courts that does weigh in for the federal government's role here. Joe Rogan, he's got questions about what's happening, and it's probably echoing what many people are thinking. So let's listen to him and get your reaction.
I see the perspective of the people that say, hey, there was an illegal program moving people in here to get votes, moving people in here to get congressional seats, and we've got to change that. I can also see the point of view of the people that say, yeah, but you don't want militarized people in the streets just roaming around, snatching people up, many of which turn out to actually be U.S. citizens that just don't have their papers on them. Are we really going to be the Gestapo? Where's your papers? Is that what we've come to?
So I know you and I talk a lot about communications and PR, and how would the department respond to that concern that he raised?
Well, this answer is very straightforward. If Tim Walz, if Mayor Fry would let us in their jails, we wouldn't have to be there at all. Currently, there are 680 criminal illegal aliens. Dana, that includes murderers, that includes rapists, child pedophiles, people who, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, you would never want these people to be on your streets or your neighbors. That's the people who we are targeting, and we are trying to get out of Minneapolis. Because we don't have state and local law enforcement's help, we do have to have a physical presence on the ground there. And I know in the interview as well, and what Joe Rogan just mentioned is the rampant crime we found, more than $9 billion, and we believe that's just the tip of the iceberg. If the state and local government would help there, if they would coordinate with the FBI, if they would coordinate with Homeland Security investigations, we would, on an expedited basis, be finding that fraud. And I think that all Americans would be better off for it. We want to give accountability. We want to give answers.
Let's get to this, if we could, because Minneapolis falls into this category of sanctuary cities. Here's the president yesterday and cutting off money to these jurisdictions here. Watch here.
Starting February 1st, we're not making any payments to sanctuary cities or states having sanctuary cities because they do everything possible to protect criminals at the expense of American citizens, and it breeds fraud and crime and all of the other problems that come. So we're not making any payment to anybody that supports sanctuary cities. So
you can look at the number of states, the number of counties, the number of cities in America. What does this mean on the 1st of February? How do things change?
Well, I'm going to leave it to President Trump on operationally how this will happen. But of course, money talks. And Tim Walz and Mayor Fry, if they want continued federal funding in their state and in their city, which their citizens need and want, then they need to start protecting their citizens and their constituents, which we've seen time and time again they haven't done. Mayor Fry claimed that there were very few criminal illegal aliens in his city. Well, just in the last 5 weeks alone, we have found, arrested, and apprehended 2,500. And that includes, as I've said before, rapists, child pedophiles. I mean, when Secretary Noem was just on the ground in Minneapolis, she was part of the arrest of a murderer from Ecuador, multiple child pedophiles. And so, I mean, it's incredibly important these purported leaders step up and do what they say that they want to do, which is protect their constituents. We have not seen that yet.
Tricia, you have got your hands full, and we appreciate you giving us some of your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Dana.
Hey everyone, I'm Emily Campagno. Catch me and my co-hosts Harris Faulkner and Kaylee McEnany on Outnumbered every weekday at 12 p.m. Eastern, or set your DVR. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page for daily highlights.